And we are live on the PHU Dynasty podcast. This is episode 58. This is our postseason roundup, and we're going to redraft the 2020 rookie draft. But it's just me flying solo today, unless anybody hops on. Got the link in the chat. If anybody's feeling bored and wants to help me with this solo job here, so we're going to start off today talking about the Super Bowl. Just quickly, kind of talk about the two teams involved mostly as far as their contract situation, how it affects Dynasty. From there, we're going to go to recap a little bit of the Shrine game to see what we got there. And we also had the Senior Bowl, one of my favorite events all year long, and specifically for draft season. Really good Senior Bowl this year, so we'll have something to talk about there. And then following that, we're going to get into a little bit of Combine talk. We got that coming up next week, which is crazy to think we're already in Combine portion of the season. So that'll be kind of fun as well. And then after that's all wrapped up, we're going to do a little bit of fun redrafting the first round of the 2020 rookie draft. You know, we've had 3 years to see these players now, so I think it's a fair time to maybe assess how that first round played out and maybe have a little bit of a controversy based on, you know, where I ended up slotting these players and, you know, just how that all shook out. So let's start right up at the top with the Super Bowl. I'm going to share this screen. So I wanted to first look at these two teams in terms of contract situations, because I think we all know how the game went down. Everybody's watching it. But from a dynasty perspective, you know, what's the landscape going to look like with those two teams heading into next year? So I'm going to pull up this lovely graphic here. All right, so we got Pat Mahomes on a 10-year contract, 6 years experience in the league. He's got 141 guaranteed. And on top of that, you got Travis Kelce down a little bit at $57 million, averaging 14 mil for his cap hit. You know, he's having a hell of a career, and he's still really not getting paid all that much. His guaranteed money for this year, 22, which is pretty high, but, you know, considering the value he has to the Chiefs and 10 years into the league, he's still not getting paid quite as much, and that's really just because he's a tight end, right? So, you know, he's got one more year left on his deal after next season, so it's 2 years total left, and it's just a matter of like how long does he want to play and how long is he effective, right? So he's going to be a piece, and interestingly enough, with the Chiefs, they have all of their receivers, every single one of them that played snaps this year is also under contract for next season. So the only one I think that was a late season addition was Mecole Hardman. He might come back on a super cheap deal or something, but he's not all that valuable at this point. But Marquez Valdes-Scantling getting a 3-year, $30 million contract last season. He's not a free agent until 25. So after next year. Same thing goes with Sky Moore. He's 26 when he's up, and I believe one more year left on Kadarius Toney's deal. He might even get cut depending on the numbers. I need to look to see what kind of numbers are in his guaranteed deal and how much dead money there is, but he seems like an easy cut candidate. And on top of that, you got Rashee Rice, breakout rookie season. He's under contract for quite a while here, 3 more years, because this was his rookie season. So it's hard to imagine a world where they don't bring in somebody at the receiver position. But we also kind of said that last year a little bit too. So they didn't really make that splash move that people thought. So originally I had thought maybe like a DeAndre Hopkins or I think Odell Beckham was in the discussion at the time, but they didn't really do any of those splashy moves. They didn't sign anybody really big name in free agency. So I could definitely see them maybe changing that this year after what was pretty much a terrible year for that entire receiving core outside of Rice. They still need somebody else. And frankly, they're in great draft position this year to take one of those late first round guys. It's a super deep wide receiver class. So there might be, one of those talented receivers sliding towards the end of the draft because of how deep it is. So I could see them taking one in the first round, and also getting that 5th year option out of the first round would be really smart and seems like something that the Chiefs would do. So really not a whole lot more in terms of offense here. You got Isaiah Pacheco 2 more years on his current deal. He's not going anywhere at given cost. I mean, he's one of the best values in the league right now. Hard to believe that they would spend a premium pick on a running back either, considering they have some other holes that they need to fill, specifically on the offensive line at the tackle position. They did spend an absurd amount on Jawan Taylor last year, 4 years, $80 million, 60 of that guaranteed. And he led the league in holding calls. He was pretty much awful the whole season. They're going to have to replace Donovan Smith on the left side. He's a free agent. I don't think he's coming back either. So they definitely have some other holes to fill. So I don't think there's going to be a whole lot offensively that changes here. I do think that adding receivers is going to be somewhat of a priority for them. So we'll see. We'll see what I forgot who their GM is nowadays. But I do know it's Andy Reid, and Andy Reid does what he wants. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I kind of wanted to look at him real quick because he needs a change of scenery. And I don't know where he is on this list. There he is. He might be a free agent this year. I think he is a free agent this year. He's not showing up on the 25 numbers. So yeah, I mean he could get a change of pace. So I'm sure the ears have perked up for the Lake Lure long gamers, maybe getting a chance at a second life of Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Who knows? I'm not holding my breath or anything, but there is an option for him, maybe to get more touches in the future here. So let's switch it over to the San Francisco 49ers. Brutal loss in the Super Bowl. That Dre Greenlaw tearing his Achilles running out onto the field was just like the most heartbreaking thing you could possibly imagine for that defense. I mean, they're so stout in the middle in their front seven. I mean, obviously Fred Warner is a complete stud and frankly a gigantic value at his current contract. He's only making, I think he's making less than 20 mil a year, which is stealing for the best linebacker there is in football right now. But Greenlaw, he was heading into his contract year this season, tears his ACL in the Super Bowl. I don't know when he's going to come back, but it doesn't feel like very early in the year, so that's thanks for him. So he's definitely gonna maybe take a hit on his payday. But speaking of contract years, it's a Brandon Ayuk contract year this year. I'm expecting big things in that contract year. They've already paid Debo. He's under contract for 2 more. George Kittle is also under contract for 2 more. So they should be sticking around. And I believe McCaffrey is also on a 2-year window left as well. So all 3 of those guys are up in 26, which is pretty great for the 49ers. It's going to be pretty much the exact same supporting cast and maybe a couple additions if they go that route in the draft. Purdy's also up in 26. So it's going to be another like just do or die year here, maybe for a couple of years here with this core. So we'll see what they can do. They might add, a third receiver. I think Juwan Jennings is leaving. I could see them maybe adding a third guy, maybe to fill that role. But the top 3-4 guys in that offense seem pretty much locked in. Maybe they add more of a field stretcher to really kind of expand the depth of the team down the field. They don't really have that stretch the field guy. I mean, of course, Debo is explosive and can do those things, but that's not really the way he's used. He's more of a yak kind of guy. So maybe one of those late first round receivers makes sense for them, but they have other holes that they'll need to fill as well due to people leaving in free agency. Let's see. All right. So Super Bowl wise, that's kind of what we got to discuss. Not a whole lot, but congrats, I guess, to the Chiefs going for the 3-peat next year. So that'll be interesting. Mahomes, I guess we can talk about Mahomes quick for Alex. Dude's a complete stud. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if they add another receiver. It was kind of a weird year for Mahomes in terms of fantasy. You would like to see a little. Oh, hold on a second. Alex, speaking of Alex Morales, Speedway could use Clyde Frog services. So it sounds like he's not very high on any chance of Clyde Frog getting his second life here on a second contract. I can't say I disagree with him. But Mahomes, yeah, just not a phenomenal fantasy season, but he's going to be rock solid till the day that he stops playing. It seems like at this point, I don't see any reason he would ever slip out of the top 10 quarterbacks. I'm curious to see what he finished at this year because I have not taken a look in a while at Mahomes because I don't own him in literally anything. And of course, Sleeper is deciding it's just not going to load, so I'm going to pull it up over here. Oh, there it is. All right, there we go. So we got Mahomes at 8 this year, quarterback 8. 27 touchdowns, 14 picks. It was the most picks he's ever thrown in a season, actually, but not much more than the last couple of years. He had 12 in 22 and 21. He had 13, so nothing like completely out of the norm. He had no rushing touchdowns this year, which is crazy. I did not know that. So yeah, I guess this guy he can really only go up for him. I mean, if they give him more help and maybe he gets back to a little bit more of the running game, then yeah, I can see that. All right, let's go to the Shrine game. Speaking of Alex Morales, he loves the Shrine game. Brings back great memories to Jimmy Garoppolo, David Morgan, the tight end. If you guys have forgotten about him, I don't blame you. I have forgotten about him many times. But Alex was very high on the great David Morgan. I think he only finished his career with, what, this is what this podcast is all about. Let's look up David Morgan's stats. Let's see what his career stats were. 16 catches for 135 yards, but he did get his touchdown before he left the league. How many years did he play? Probably like 2. 3 years. And he had 19 total targets for his entire career. 6th round draft pick from Buchanan Dam, Texas. Couldn't even tell you where that is. They might have a Buc-ee's nearby. All right, so Shrine game this year, I'll be honest with you, is a little bit down in terms of talent this year at the Shrine game. Quarterbacks weren't all that great. They never really are at the Shrine game, but there's always like one that kind of stands out. And frankly, the running backs, receivers, not really strong. Last year was a great tight end class, so there were some good tight ends that went to the Shrine game. This year, there was a couple of standout guys, I guess, if you want to say. So the big one is Frank Gore Jr., played for Southern Miss. He's a junior, so he came out early. They let him do the Shrine game, which usually was only for seniors, but they've kind of changed around the All-Star game formatting recently with the Senior Bowl as well to allow for redshirt juniors and people with injuries to get a chance to make their claim at one of these All-Star games. So, yeah, Frank Gore looked really good. He had a great run in the game and also had great week of practice by all reports that I've seen. He had, let's look at some of these stats. He's pretty rock solid throughout his entire college career. Averaged 5.9, 4.5, 6.1, 4.9 in that Southern Miss offense with not a whole lot of firepower. So he was the focal point. He finished this season, his redshirt junior season, with 231 carries, 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Biggest thing is he's Frank Gore's kid, right? So it's like obviously he's got the bloodline there, but he also is a little bit smaller, and by a little bit I mean a lot of it. Like he's 5'8", 195, so he's definitely not that chunky build that his dad had, but he looks more explosive, and he's got that little he's I don't want to say he's got that Michael Turner look to him, but he's definitely not nearly as big as that, but he's got that that thick small look, even though he's only 195. So I'm interested to see where he lands. I mean, I don't think he's going to be a starter or anything like that. He seems more like a change of pace back, but in the right situation that can have some value. But he might be one of those like backups that you just kind of need to have as a handcuff. So let's move forward to the other kind of standout guy I thought from this Shrine game, and that was Malik Washington, Virginia Cavaliers wide receiver. He's a senior this year. Absolutely blew up this year for Virginia. Last year, he was a little bit overshadowed by the great Dontavian Wicks at Virginia. Shout out to the, I believe it's the Lionheads that own Dontavian Wicks. This season, Malik Washington, so the season before with Wicks, he had 694 receiving yards, not a whole lot going on there. And then this year, 1,400 yards and 9 touchdowns with 110 catches. Just a fantastic season. He's great after the catch, just like one of the best, arguably one of the best in the class after the catch, but he's very small at 5'8", 194. So he's kind of in that mold of last year's receiver class. You'll see it this year. I mean, especially if you haven't studied it much, or if you're about to watch the combine next week. It's kind of a very different class of receivers this year. Last year was a lot of smaller hobbit types, if you will, much shorter players such as Josh Downs, kind of in that mold where it's a lot of guys like Zay Flowers, smaller 5'9" under, but very fast and have the explosiveness. This year, you're going to see a lot more larger players, especially in the first couple of rounds, come off the board. So it's more of the traditional, Z and X receiver as opposed to the slot. So, Washington is one of the better slot guys, projected to be slot guys in this class. He did play a lot of outside in college, but his size is going to probably dictate him to play, specifically inside and maybe play a little bit outside. But he's a guy that really interests me because he did have a great week and then played well in the game as well. But if you look at his tape, he looks pretty damn good. He's going to be an interesting guy to watch at the combine next week to see what his numbers are. A few of these smaller guys really can blow up the combine. We'll talk about some more here in a minute when we get there. But yeah, that's kind of all I really got from the Shrine game this year. I mean, the tight end class really didn't impress me that much. There was a couple of guys I was looking at, but neither one of them really stood out to me. So I'm not expecting much in terms of NFL and dynasty prospects this year from the class. So, but here's something I did notice about the Shrine game. There was a lot of players that, to me, fit one specific team in this dynasty league, and that is the Baton Rouge Bombers. And the reason I say that is because the Shrine game blessed us with lots of excellent names, and from a dynasty perspective in the draft. So, when it gets down into those gritty later rounds and even the waiver draft, these are the guys I expect the Bombers to target. So we got, just starting right off the top, Ladietrick Griffin. I mean, you can't write it up. It's just phenomenal. And if I would be dumbfounded to find out if he didn't end up on the Bombers by the end of the year. Not to be overshadowed by Bub Means, which that can't be his real first name. I'm going to look this up right now. Bub Means. If this is really his first name, no, it's just Gerard. Okay. Gerard Means, but Bub is a phenomenal, I mean, you can't beat the nickname though. I don't think there's ever been a player in the league named Bub. Then after that, we have Josh Cephas, Brother Cephas Part 2, Brother Cephas Jr. Quintez Cephas, he already ended up on Justin's team. Why not bring in Josh? Bring him in. Frankly, one of the best tight end names I've seen in a long time, McAllen Castles. I wonder if he has any connection to Thad Castle. And actually, the S doesn't work, but McAllen Castle, great name. And then, of course, Cornelius Johnson. I mean, that's just a tremendous wide receiver name. He actually played pretty decent, too. I will say, I didn't say there was a whole lot of standouts. Cornelius Johnson did kind of have a little bit of moments there during the week as you watch the Twitter film come in. So he actually has some size to him as well. So he might actually end up being somewhat of a relevant player in Dynasty as it gets closer to the draft. But yes, those are your Bombers prospects from the Shrine game. I had to point them out just because anytime I see names like that, I get excited. So let's move forward into the premier college all-star game, the Senior Bowl, one of the best events all year. This year was loaded. I mean, what a phenomenal Senior Bowl class. Maybe not even in terms of dynasty or fantasy football, but just regular, just NFL talent. I mean, this offensive line group was one of the best offensive line groups I can remember in the last 4 or 5 years. I think there were 3 centers that showed up that could all go in the first round, which is crazy. I think there's also a chance that there is a record set for tight ends taken in the first round. I meant offensive tackles taken in the first round. Just a crazy amount of offensive line talent. I could rattle off a bunch of names: Jackson Power Johnson, Graham Barton, Zach Frazier, Jordan Morgan, not Fuaga, Talise Fuaga. I mean, there's just a ton of them, and there was great players that even I didn't even know who they were heading into the game, like third, fourth round prospects that will probably end up going in the second as a result of the week. So really, really great Senior Bowl class this year. And then getting into the dynasty relevant players, the receiver class this year is so stacked. I think everybody's kind of figured that out at this point. But some of these not top 6-7 receivers showed up and played great. So we can talk about some of those right now. So the first one was Roman Wilson. Frankly, not a great college career at Michigan, but they don't throw the ball that much. It's never really been their identity. He did lead the team with 12 receiving touchdowns and 789 yards this year. And I didn't really know much about him heading into the Senior Bowl. I didn't really watch his tape or anything like that. So he was very impressive in terms of route running, being able to get open pretty much on every single one-on-one rep. He's 6', 192, so he's got pretty decent size. But I mean, he's projected as a slot receiver, but I feel like he could do a little bit more. But he's just one of these guys that like nobody was really hot on as in terms of like a day 2 pick. I would be shocked if he didn't get picked in rounds 2 and 3 this year, just based on the fact that he's going to be open. I mean, the guy he made every single cornerback. Also a great cornerback group this year at the Senior Bowl with Quinyon Wilson, I think it is. It's the guy from Toledo, but he looked awesome too. And he burned him every single play, Wilson did. So I think it's going to be a good draft season for Roman Wilson, and I think he's really helped himself quite a bit. Next on the list, Ladd McConkey, frankly, could have made the Justin list as well for receiver names, but he had a tremendous Senior Bowl. I can't remember seeing a guy get that open pretty much consistently throughout the week of practices. Really kind of an interesting player profile, though. He's not all that big. I think he was like 5'11", 190 or something like that. Not a lot of production at Georgia. He only his career high for receiving yards in a season was 762 as a junior. He didn't do that much this year. 30 catches, 478 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Not great by any means. But if you watch his tape, the guy gets routes. He just understands where to be, what to do, can find zone coverages, has excellent feet. Just some of the best feet I've seen at the Senior Bowl in a long time. Catches everything thrown to him. So I'm not really sure. I think it was just an embarrassment of riches, really, for Georgia. They just had too many guys to get the ball to, throughout the last 4 years. I just think he's just not a focal point when you got guys like Brock Bowers, and before that it was George Pickens, and they've had talent every single year come out of Georgia. The running game is always important there. So he's an interesting player. I mean, you watch him, the easy comp is Hunter Renfrow. But I think he's just like a different type of player. I think Renfrow is a little bit more gritty, and McConkey has more finesse to his game. He just gets open, and it's impressive to watch. I think he's going to go in the second round of the NFL draft, especially after the week he had at the Senior Bowl. So, I mean, I've seen him go as high in mock drafts as 33 to the Carolina Panthers, which kind of feels like a good fit because they just need guys that get open on that team. But he's going to be a dynasty player to watch for sure. I don't know if he ends up in the first round of the actual rookie draft. Seems unlikely unless he lands in a great situation. But a high second round pick, I could see that for sure. He's going to be one of the players to watch too at the combine to see what he tests. Because if he tests and he's running 4.3s, low 4.4s, he's gonna be a huge name as we leave the combine. So next was Ricky Pearsall. Didn't really have a whole lot about him heading into the Senior Bowl, but he also was another guy that just got open. He's got a little bit of size to him. He was 6'1", 190 as well. Had a good senior season, 965 yards, 4 touchdowns. Didn't really produce all that much, honestly, the 2 years prior with Richardson. So that was a little disappointing. But he makes great catches. He's clutch. I watched a couple of his games after the Senior Bowl, and he just like makes plays when he gets the ball thrown to him. He just doesn't get a lot of targets. So um, I'm interested to see where his draft stock lands. I feel like he's probably boosting himself up into that rounds 3 and 4 discussion after the great Senior Bowl. But I still think there's more to his overall profile that we need to see at the combine. So I'm going to wait to decide where I'm going to put him on my board. Last guy I'll mention quickly is Spencer Rattler at the quarterback position. A really weird year at quarterback at the Senior Bowl. They stacked one of the rosters with Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and Rattler, I believe. And the other team had like Joe Milton and like a couple of guys that just weren't all that impressive. The Tulane quarterback, I forgot his name, but it's just not really impressive year at the quarterback position. And they put them both on like the two top guys on the same team, which was kind of weird. But Rattler did win the MVP of the Senior Bowl, which historically is a good thing to have on your resume. Charlie Campbell of WalterFootball.com, friend of the podcast, if you will, he has released a couple of articles recently about how teams are much higher on Rattler than maybe the media is currently. They think he's got something to him in terms of his overall prospect profile. They think he could be a pro quarterback, apparently. So not a guy that I'm going to be drafting high, but the NFL seems to believe he's a day 2 prospect, rounds 2 or 3. So that would be kind of surprising. It's going to be an interesting year at the quarterback position in the draft. I mean, you definitely are going to have your top 3 or 4. I mean, the 3 are pretty much locked in at this point with Daniels, May, and Williams, but McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Rattler, who knows? I mean, it could be literally anything. So I'm intrigued to see how that all shakes out at the quarterback position. All right, so that's what I got for the Senior Bowl. Let's move into the Combine. So the Combine this year, I think, is going to be really important for one position group in particular, and I think it's the running backs. There hasn't really been one running back that's truly like set himself apart like we've had in past years. We haven't had those kind of stud guys that we are typically seeing. For example, your Breece Halls, your Bijans, your Jahmyr Gibbs, your Jonathan Taylors. There just isn't really that kind of guy this year. A lot of people are gravitating towards Jonathan Brooks, and I understand that for sure. He's actually not going to be at the Senior Bowl, or I'm sorry, not going to be participating in the Combine because he tore his ACL. So that's kind of a bummer. But, you know, for some of these other running backs, I really think this is going to be an important week for them. Specifically, Trey Benson from Florida State, Bucky Irving from Oregon, Audric Estime from Notre Dame, and Jalen Wright from Tennessee. I think that grouping of 4 or 5 backs have a lot to win this week if they can really run fast, show out in specifically like the pass catching drills for the bigger backs. At least like those guys could really set themselves apart and maybe get themselves into that, you know, day 2 category in terms of draft selection. So I'm most excited to see Benson. I feel like he's got the size, speed, and he also has produced quite a bit in college. So I feel like Benson's probably that next guy that might come off the board after maybe Brooks being the first guy, if that ends up being true, and then his medicals check out. But there's definitely a lot of guys in this draft that have upside at the running back position. I don't think at the Senior Bowl there wasn't. I think Marshawn Lloyd was the only one that really kind of got me going, I guess, if you will. He just wasn't really anything super special, but he's got some wiggle to him. So I just don't know if this is going to be a great running back class, but it definitely has some depth to it, and actually could be sneaky good in terms of just overall depth. I think there's a lot of good players, but maybe just not that, like we talked about, like that Breece Hall. I just don't see that this year. So I think this is a huge week for them. Second I think the next group that has a lot to gain or lose this week is that second tier of wide receivers. Biggest group, obviously, like the wide receivers are stacked this year, but it really drops off after that top three, right? So everybody, almost everybody consensus at this point has Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Rome Odunze as those like tier 1A, 1B, 1C. After that, it's kind of up for grabs on what your preference is, what kind of player you like. And I think this week is really going to be a big deal in terms of getting those players sorted out. Starting at the top, this consensus seems to be with Brian Thomas. He's a height, weight, speed guy. He produced big time this year for LSU and Jaden Daniels. On the other side of Malik Neighbors, he has tons of talent, raw talent for sure, and he's a guy that could just totally blow up the combine. So I'm really looking forward to see what he does. A couple other guys in that same category: Keon Coleman from Florida State, totally different type of player. The classic Voosh, go up and get it receiver, if you will, and he's a guy that he doesn't feel like he's going to test well based on what you see on tape. But there is a chance that maybe he's just this freak athlete that nobody really knows. And if he goes off at the combine, he's going to be a surefire top 25 pick at that point. So it's going to be interesting with those two. And I think the last guy you might be able to throw into this grouping would be Troy Franklin, the Oregon wide receiver. Definitely a different type of build than the other two guys mentioned, a little bit more leggy and thin. But he had a great year for Oregon. Really solid route runner, but he's just not that type of player in terms of going up and getting it and making those contested catches. He might be in the mold of that Robbie Anderson, if you will. So I'm interested to see how he runs, because if he's running 4.3s and blowing up the combine as well, I mean he also feels like a first round potential candidate. I really think there's like 8 receivers this year that you could make the argument for them going in the first round. One of those guys, I don't know if I would do it, but I could see it happening because the NFL just loves speed. But Xavier Worthy out of Texas, absolutely electric on tape. I mean, anytime he gets the ball in his hands, he's good for huge gains. I mean, he's the kind of guy I could see the NFL falling in love with, specifically if he blows up the combine. If he's running 4.29, 4.28, something crazy like that, I would not be shocked if he snuck into the back end of the first round there. And if that's the case, he's going to end up being a high dynasty pick just based on draft capital. So all 4 of those guys, there's more I'm not mentioning off the top of my head, like Adonai Mitchell, the Roman Wilsons. I mean, even like Roman could get into that end of the first category if he blows it up too. It's just going to be a crazy year at receiver. So I'm really looking forward to it. Another receiver, maybe a little bit on the definitely not in the second tier for me, but Johnny Wilson, just ridiculous measurables. Like I think going into the combine, he was listed at 6'7", 237, which I mean that's just ridiculous for a receiver. I think at the Senior Bowl he ended up weighing in at like 6'6", 230-ish or something, which is still just massive. But he's got that Kelvin Benjamin thing going on where it also has to do with the fact that he's from Florida State, but he drops tons of passes. He doesn't really have that wiggle that you would want. Not expecting any wiggle really at that size, to be honest with you, but you were just hoping for a little bit more. He did have a decent week at the Senior Bowl. But he might just be a conversion to tight end kind of guy in the mold of like a Logan Thomas perhaps, or something like that. So I'm interested to see what he runs, because I mean if you're 6'6" and you're 230 and you're putting up crazy numbers at the combine, I mean you're gonna get boosted up no matter what, and I can see a team falling in love with him just based on the size alone. So if JJ Arcega-Whiteside could go, I think he went the second round or something like that, then I can't see why you would. Why an NFL team wouldn't fall in love like that and maybe take him higher than they should. Another player for the combine that I'm looking out for is Jaheim Bell, also a Florida State player. He's a really weird guy because he only has the 6'2", 230-ish height, weight going on, which is basically a fullback size, but he's definitely athletic. He pops on tape every here and there, and he was a really like highly thought of player coming out of high school. And I think the NFL might value him higher than other teams do. I'm sorry, in terms of the media, I don't think the media is on him at all. He didn't really do a whole lot at the Senior Bowl, but none of the tight ends really stood out the Senior Bowl at all. So it could be a situation where his actual athleticism is on display at Indianapolis, and he can really show what he can do. So I'm interested to watch him just to see what his numbers are, because his tape does let you believe that maybe there's something there. Speaking of tight ends, really not a great tight end class this year. Obviously, you have Bowers at the top. Outside of that, the only other guy that seems like he might be super dynasty relevant right out the gate would be Jatavion Sanders from Texas. He is a little smaller than maybe I originally thought, too. I think he's 6'4", 240 something, so not like superhuman size or anything. And he definitely shows you some stuff on tape. He can block. He definitely will get his nose in there. But he also is pretty elusive in the passing game as a route runner. So, I mean, in any other class, he might be a little bit lower on like your rankings or your projected round that he might end up going in. But this year, it's pretty much Bowers is going to go in the top 20 picks. And then after that, you can make the argument for almost any tight end. And I think the only other one I would even really consider high, maybe in the late second, early third, would be Jatavion Sanders. So I this week isn't really that important for him because I don't think there's a ton of competition. But he still needs to at least show that he has the athleticism he had on tape in order to confirm that. So I'm not really looking forward to this tight end class. Last year was just special. I mean, we got so many great prospects last year. I feel like this year's the receiver class. And maybe next year's the running back class based on some of the guys going back to school like Travion Henderson. So we'll have to see. Anywho, so that's what I'm looking forward to at the Combine. I'm thinking there'll be a couple other players that just kind of come out of nowhere and blow it up and end up vaulting up the rankings. But we're going to have quite a few more episodes talking about all these rookies. Hoping to get Charlie Campbell back on again, too, to hopefully talk about all the guys that we want to talk about heading up to the draft. I wanted to do something different this time. I don't think we've ever really done this before on the podcast, so I thought it was kind of cool. I saw somebody else wrote an article about redrafting older drafts from back in the day for the NFL. So I was like, why not redraft our rookie drafts? I didn't think it was super fair doing anybody from the last couple of years because there's still the jury's out on some players. But I started with 2020. One, because I thought it was a very interesting draft. And then two, it's given these players 3 years to kind of settle in and we can really figure out their values. So I'm sure there'll be a couple in here that might be debatable and maybe it would stir some discussion. But we'll get to those, I guess, when we get to those. So let's start right off at the top. So if we're picking 1-1, who would I pick based on what we've seen in the NFL so far and how things have played out dynasty-wise? The easy choice for me is Justin Jefferson. He's done it every single year he's been in the league. The Plague picked him originally at 2.1, which was an absolute steal. I think Denzel Mims went over him. T. Higgins was above him, but T. Higgins has panned out, but not to the level of Justin Jefferson. This guy coming into, there's a reason he went 2-1 in our draft. He wasn't that, I don't think anybody thought he was that player coming out of LSU. I think everybody kind of liked him, but I don't think anybody loved him in terms of being like that top 10 dynasty asset. I don't think anybody really viewed that. And that's displayed by the fact that nobody took him in the first round of our own draft. So obviously redrafting now, he's the dynasty. He's a top 3 dynasty asset, arguably number 1, with CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase at receiver. You can't really say anything more about this guy. He's going to be great. I think this next year will be interesting potentially without Kirk Cousins and more target competition with Jordan Addison. Maybe it comes down a little bit with whoever's playing quarterback. Feel like what if it's a JJ McCarthy, if you will? It might be a little bit less, but he proved last year too that he could do it with just about anybody at quarterback because when Cousins went down, he was still producing even after he got injured. So I'm really not worried about Justin Jefferson one bit moving forward. He's super young. He has everything you could possibly want. I'm gonna pull up his numbers real quick. I just want to see. Yeah, I mean he played 10 games this year and still had 1,000 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he missed 7 games and still was totally he was in the top 30 receivers with all those missed games. It's crazy. The 3 previous years he finished wide receiver 6, 4, and 1. So he's going to be a stud, and he's only 24 years old. So you can't really ask for anything more. I guess you could debate if you're a huge CeeDee Lamb fan. I guess you could debate him being 1-1. CeeDee Lamb has been incredible this past year. He is the 100% focal point of the Cowboys offense. He was the number 1 receiver this year. He had 1,700 yards and 12 touchdowns. Absurdly good year. He had 181 targets this year. The previous year, he had 156 targets and finished wide receiver 6. So basically, if you look at his numbers all the way dating back to his first year in 2020, he finished wide receiver 20, wide receiver 13, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 1. So he's gotten better every single year. And he's only 24, which is crazy. I feel like he's been in the league forever. And I always forget that he came in when he was 20. So, just a phenomenal pick by the Lambs to go up and trade up for the face of the franchise, if you will. It's definitely panned out, and he's one of the top dynasty assets. I had my questions in the previous offseason if, he was that true bona fide number 1 guy. I wasn't sure if that would ever really be a thing, but I was completely wrong. So I am willing to admit that he is one of the best players in the game right now, and I would love to have him on my team. I know that'll never happen, but he's a great dynasty asset to have. So really just to recap the first 2 picks, obviously in our real draft, it was Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Jonathan Taylor. So I'm going to go to number 3 here, and that is Jonathan Taylor. So the only swap I would make with 2 and 3 is just putting Lamb ahead because of position longevity, really. I mean, obviously with Taylor, he's a great player. Kind of a weird year for him as well, with the whole holdout thing, and then not really getting into the game until week 5. When he did show up, though, he was great. He averaged 4.4 yards a carry, which was a little bit lower than his usual numbers. But he was battling an injury as well. His last couple of years have been left a little bit to be desired, but that's mostly just injuries, right? He only played 10 games this year. He played 11 the year before. But the year before that, he played all 17, finished as RB1 with 1,800 yards and 18 touchdowns. So I still think he can get back to that. He's going to be going into his age 25 or 6 seasons. So he's kind of right in that prime. So I think he'll get back on track next year and should be even better with Anthony Richardson maybe taking some attention away. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that's run against more stack boxes than Jonathan Taylor in the last few years. I mean, everybody knows what they're trying to do. So they need to develop more of a passing game so that it makes things easier for him. But I love Jonathan Taylor. He probably should have been 1-1 in that draft. It doesn't really matter because Sean had both picks. But in the redraft, I'm going to say that he was 1-3. So, all right. So this is where things get interesting. I think those were the pretty obvious 1, 2, 3. This could go in a number of different directions at 1-4. I had to take a look at just overall dynasty rankings and who I would want to have long-term. And obviously we're a 1 quarterback league, so it changes things. But I just love Justin Herbert. So I feel like I would take him at 1-4 to just lock down my quarterback position for quite a while. I really believe in Jim Harbaugh. I think that he's going to get the team on track. Herbert was such a stud in the previous year before things kind of went down the hill. You look at Herbert, his numbers. If I'm going to pull, of course, now it's going to crash as soon as I pull it up. I think he was quarterback 1 last year. Could be wrong on that. Okay, it's crashing. Let's try this. Um, really, just the quarterbacks in general. I had a tough time ranking because this was a great quarterback class, right? We had Justin Herbert, we had Joe Burrow, and Tua Tagovailoa. So I feel like all of those guys, you know, you can't really knock too much any of their performances so far. So I think they all kind of finished what we thought at this point. Maybe Justin Herbert was a little bit of a surprise, but um, let's see. Okay, I can pull him up here. Yeah, so he's number 2 last 2 years ago. So he finished quarterback 9 his rookie season, quarterback 2 his sophomore season, then 11 and 17. This year he was banged up. He started the year banged up too, really. So it was really tough for him to get going. But he threw 38 touchdowns his sophomore season, 31 the year before. I really think that things are going to get back on track. And if you look at the value in which the Lambs got at 410, the last pick of the draft, and that kind of shows you what people thought of him pre-draft. Nobody really believed he was going to be this super stud guy. So I'm really impressed with what he's been able to do. And I think when you just look at some of the other players around this this pick, you could go in a number of different directions, but I just like the stability that that Herbert's going to be there, and he's going to be at least a quarterback 10 or above for the next 4 or 5 seasons on his current contract. So at 1-5 next, I picked Brandon Ayuk. I like Ayuk. Obviously, he's on my team, so I am a little biased. But he's been great over the last couple of seasons. Really has panned out. I remember there was a time where Ayuk was in Shanahan's doghouse, and it seemed kind of bleak for a little while that maybe it won't actually get better. Maybe he is just this 800 yard a year kind of guy. But he blew up last year with his 1,000-yard, 8 touchdown season. And then this year backed it up with, on less catches, he had 1,342 yards and 7 touchdowns, averaging almost 18 yards a catch. So, I mean, it was a phenomenal year. And he's truly their wide receiver 1. I mean, obviously Debo, probably gets classified as that wide receiver 1 based on his contract status and what he's done in the past. But, he's more of a gadget guy than he is a receiver. So I feel like with Ayuk, you're getting a true bona fide, one of the best route runners in the league. He's truly developed into that. Kind of gives me the same Devontae Adams vibes from a career perspective. Adams kind of started slow as well. He also got doghouse for a little bit and really turned into one of the best route runners in the league with reliable hands. So I can kind of see that same career trajectory for Ayuk. He's going to be a contract year guy this year, so I expect even a bigger year. I think he finished, he was wide receiver 10 this year, so he got into wide receiver 1 status after being 15 last year. So I'm really looking forward to see how he performs next year, and I really think he's worth the 1.5 here over a couple of these other guys we're about to talk about. I got him at 2.7 in that draft in 2020. It's funny because I think I was really... I had him neck and neck with a great receiver, Bryan Edwards, and I believe Alex Morales was ahead of me and picked Bryan Edwards. So I was just going to take whoever was left between the two, and I'm glad he picked Bryan Edwards because I would not have Brandon Ayuk right now. So that kind of worked out for the Armadillos. Speaking of the Muskrats, let's go to 1-6, and I'm going to put in T. Higgins. To me, this was a tough one between him and Ayuk. I feel like they were both kind of neck and neck. Higgins seems to be banged up more. I feel like he is more of a true number 1 alpha kind of receiver as opposed to maybe Ayuk being a little bit more of that just standard route running. Doesn't really have the size that Higgins has, but I feel like Ayuk over the last couple of seasons has been a little bit more consistent, so I went with him. Higgins has plenty of upside, though. He's very young. I think he's only 25. He's going to be a free agent, I believe, this year. I'm not sure if they've said if they're going to tag him or not. I mean, that seems logical, but I don't know what their cap situation looks like in Cincinnati. So I'm not sure if they're going to be able to keep him. But, I mean, if he sticks around with Burrow, he's going to be a very valuable player to have in Dynasty, and he's well worth the 1-6 here. He was picked originally at 110. I love T. Higgins. I have him in a couple of other leagues, and I'm really happy to have him on those teams. I'm just not 100% sure about where he's going to end up. I mean, if he goes to a team like Carolina, maybe his stock takes a bit of a hit. Who knows if he's a checks in the bank kind of guy? We have no idea. So that's kind of why I put him here under Ayuk for now. Speaking of his teammate currently, Joe Burrow, he goes at 1.7. You could argue him going higher as well. The only thing with Burrow is he doesn't really get quite the rushing numbers that maybe some of these other guys get. And he also has been quite banged up, albeit they've been terrible injuries. I don't want to call him injury prone because I don't think that's fair. But he definitely has been more banged up than other folks at the quarterback position. He did have a quarterback 4 finish last year, and then 7 the year before, but played his 10 games this year and then 10 games in 2020. So he's a great quarterback, dude. I mean, I'm not going to say anything bad about Joe Burrow. I think you could easily flip-flop him and Justin Herbert in this draft if you wanted to. He actually ran more than I thought in 2022. I'm looking at it. He had 5 touchdowns on the ground, 259 yards. So he definitely provided something on the ground. So I don't want to disparage that, but he's going to be good next year. I'm looking forward to seeing. I feel like that's still a Super Bowl contending team when everybody's healthy. I'm looking forward to another Joe Burrow season. I think he could go higher on this list too. This was a hard one for me, so I'm sure there'll be others that disagree. Let's see. We got a comment here from James Sifu. This redraft is a great time recapping the Muskrats' failure to get top talent that was in this draft. I was surprised to see Herbert so high. I thought back half of the first. Yeah, I mean, so I also was struggling with the positional value of quarterback, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier. I think it's tough though, because nowadays, we have our 6-point touchdown league. So quarterbacks are very valuable, and more so than they were in the past. So I think I took a lot into consideration, but I think I took longevity maybe also into more consideration than maybe others did. So I just feel like Herbert's a locked and loaded, next 7 to 10 year kind of guy. Burrow, I feel the same, honestly, about. But maybe Higgins, not so much. I could see Higgins kind of falling off. And then who knows? Maybe Ayuk is a checks in the bank guy. Maybe he doesn't get quite the longevity either. So I value the quarterbacks somewhat high. But then also, too, as we get lower into this, you'll see this was not a deep draft class at all. There was a lot of misses. A lot of players that looked like they were going to be hits that just never finished out their rookie contracts to be anything special. But let's keep going, and maybe we'll get to those as we get down to picks 110-ish and so on and so forth. All right, so next I got Michael Pittman at 1.8. Michael Pittman has been very solid. I think he's definitely outperformed his 2.4 status with the Lionheads. He's been traded around quite a bit. He was originally drafted by the Lionheads at 2.4, but I believe now he is on, I want to say, the Adams team. Who's Adam Tibbs? I'm going to confirm. Yes, he is on Tibbs' team. Historically, his numbers, he's kind of hovering in that wide receiver 2-ish, field, and maybe not reaching that elite status that would, vault him up this list a little bit. But he did finish last year with 1,152 yards, which was career high. Only 4 touchdowns, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I feel like a guy that's 6'4" and 223 has jump ball ability. He does make contested catches. He's tough. I've seen him go over the middle and make tons of catches. He only has 15 touchdowns in 4 years. So, you could blame a lot of that maybe on the Colts' lack of great quarterback production over that time frame. I think it would have been a little bit different with Richardson too, of course. His finishes have been 84, 16, 27, 25. So he's never eclipsed the top 15. He's also, I believe he's a contract year player as well, and he's 26 already. He was an older rookie. So, I mean, I'm not trying to say he's a bad player by any means. He's very solid, and he's definitely a dynasty contributor. I just don't know if he's ever going to get to that wide receiver 1 category that maybe some thought. I know a couple years ago in redraft, there was, a lot of hype surrounding him pre-draft to try to get him into the top 4 or 5 rounds at the receiver position. I don't know if that is ever going to happen again. Maybe things rebound next year with Richardson if he resigns, but he might end up going somewhere else. Who knows? I don't know if the Colts can afford that, though. They don't really have a whole lot outside of Josh Downs. Alec Pierce is the number one cardio guy in the league. He doesn't do anything. So let's see. We got a message here from the great Alex Morales. We should recap how many waffles the Lambs ate at the Waffle House. Spoiler, it was sad. Oh, the thing is, that wasn't even related to this league, but I understand what you're getting at, but, we're talking about Dynasty here. The Alex Morales train, I mean, we're going to have a hell of a team discussion. I mean, Dine Around the Horn's coming up next week, and you better have your ammunition ready, because I feel like it's gonna get wild, so be ready for that, Alex. So rounding out Michael Pittman, he was picked at 2.4. I definitely think he's outperformed that. I'm just not so sure he is quite in that same tier as Higgins and Ayuk. I just don't see that personally, but maybe somebody else disagrees. Let's go to 1-9. I've got Tua Tagovailoa. I believe I traded that pick 3-1 to the Bombers. And Tua's been very, very good. I mean, he gets slandered all the time, but he does exactly what the offense asks him to do. This year was his best year by far. He had 4,600 yards, 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, which was it was 1,100 more than he had last season. And he was also banged up a shit ton for the first 3 years of his career. So this was the first year that you really got to see maybe him blossom into what he's truly capable of. I like Tua. I don't think he offers you really anything rushing wise, so that's kind of a little bit of a hit, and maybe why he's not higher on this list. But he's going to be a top 10 quarterback for the next few years for sure. Longevity wise, with his injuries and his concussions, I mean, who knows? But I like Tua a lot. So I kind of at the time when Nico Collins hadn't blown up, I was regretting this trade with Justin, with Tua being the trade piece that I got Nico Collins and Tommy Tremble for. So I was kind of like, if Nico Collins ends up being nothing, I just basically gave up Tua for absolutely nothing. So I'm glad that worked out. But Tua is a valuable quarterback too. I don't know if you would want to start him every single week, but he's a good quarterback to have on your roster, and he's certainly outperformed 3.1, especially in this year where it wasn't really all that deep. So it was a good pick for the Bombers. And he's been deep at quarterback ever since with him and Burrow. So a great draft for the Bombers there, and all in all. The last guy I have on this list, and this is going to be weird maybe for some, I have Antonio Gibson at 110. And obviously the last 2 years for Gibson, it's fallen off a cliff with Brian Robinson showing up. But for those first 2 years, he was running back 12 and running back 11. 11 touchdowns that rookie season. He finished with 795 yards and added quite a bit in the receiving game. And then 2021, he had 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns. Once again, received quite a few passes. And then last year, he basically just became a third down back. And he's productive to some extent, but he's not anybody wouldn't be thrilled to start. Antonio Gibson, will put it that way at this point. He finishes RB 45 this year and then 35 the year before that. So I doubt he's going to end up being a full-time back ever again, but for those first 2 years he was very usable in terms of dynasty. And then on top of that, he was picked at 4-1, so he at the time he outperformed the crap out of those expectations. So but when you look at the rest of this list, I mean, I'm gonna actually pull up the draft one more time just to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody, because I just don't think there were anybody that totally stood out to me in this draft. It's like, we got to put this guy at 110. So I'm going to pull this up one more time. But I can go through. So we had Cam Akers 1-4, Jerry Jeudy 1-5, J.K. Dobbins 1-6, DeAndre Swift 1-7. I mean, he didn't really live up to any hype. I mean, I don't think did he ever have 1,000 yards rushing in any season? Okay, just this past year. So he had 1,049 this past year in 16 games. So, okay. Maybe he turns it around. I don't know. But I feel like he just was constantly in that RB3 territory. So maybe I guess he could have got slotted into 110 if he wanted to. We got another comment here. Hold on. Something about Michael Pittman. Alex must have missed the Michael Pittman discussion. Hold on, Alex. I'll bring it back up for you. I had him at 1-8. So I hope that's I hope that fits your narrative. I had a hard time outside of that though. I feel like 1-8 was valuable for him. Denzel Mims 1-9, Henry Ruggs 1-8, Jalen Rager 2-2, Keyshawn Vaughn 2-5, Brian Edwards 2-6, Laviska Shenault 2-8, Zach Moss 2-9. I guess Zach Moss maybe, I don't know. Van Jefferson 2-10, AJ Dillon, he's kind of just meh. Josh Kelly, Chase Claypool, KJ Hamler, Anthony McFarland, Antonio Gandy Golden. What a great name drop. Devin Duvernay. Yeah, this was an absolutely awful third round. I mean, outside of Tua at 3-1, there was not a lot going on here. Darrington Evans. Round 4 was obviously Antonio Gibson, Eno Benjamin, Quintez Cephas, DJ Dallas, LaMichael Pirine, Cole Kmet. Okay, that was a nice 4-6. Okay, you could argue that one. Kmet being a 4-6. He could have been a 110 in this draft. Hold on, let me get another comment. No Jalen Hurts. Well, technically he wasn't a draft pick. He was a waiver draft pick, so I didn't throw him in. I guess he would be the clear choice then, I guess, yes, if we were including those. Yeah, Herbert was 410. Devin Ossie. I don't even know. I forgot who that was. John Hightower. Who the fuck is John Hightower? Tim Hightower. I love Tim Hightower. Yeah, Jalen Hurts would definitely be in there for sure, James. If we were... I probably should look at the waiver draft. Let me look at the waiver draft here. Maybe I should have included these guys. Donovan Peoples-Jones. Travis Homer, Adam Troutman. Jalen Hurts definitely at 1-6 in the waiver draft to Dan, who then cut him and let me get him. James Prochet, Jarrett Stidham, Darnell Mooney. Wow, that was a nice pick. You know what? I think we're gonna have to do a little segment. Best waiver draft picks of all time. I think that might have to happen. Colin Johnson, James. I loved Colin Johnson. Let it be known. I loved him. It's okay. It didn't work out. Gabe Davis at 2-3. Holy shit. How did I not see that? What a pick by Justin Sr. 2-3 of the waiver draft. I mean, not that he ever, blew up anything dynasty-wise. He was still very serviceable. Wow, that's a shocker. I did not remember that one. Oh, and then the great James Robinson pick. Everybody loved James Robinson. Yeah, so, I mean, there was other guys in this draft for sure, if you consider the waiver draft. Maybe for the next redraft episode where we'll do another year, I'll make sure to include those because we do miss on some folks, that's for sure. So what are we at here? We're at 1 hour and 2 minutes, so I think that is right about time to cut this off. Thanks for listening to me ramble on for an hour, and we're going to get back to it next week. We're going to stay on schedule next week with our Dine Around the Horn, and then we're going to pick back up with a full rookie draft preview and NFL Combine talk on March 6th. So we're really going to dive deep into that. I'm going to try to do something special for that one. I'm going to see if I can maybe pull some strings to get somebody else on to maybe discuss that with us. But for Dine Around the Horn, pay attention to your messages. I'm going to start reaching out to some folks to see who wants to participate in that. I feel like we would not be doing the crowd the service that they deserve by not having Alex Morales on. So I'm going to probably lock him in as one of the guests. I feel like that's just like a necessary thing at this point. Who knows? We might do more than 3. I don't know. We'll see what we can do. But I'll be in touch with y'all this week to see if we can get that locked in. And then I wanted a quick shout out to Sean. He has not been feeling well over the last week and a half or so. We tried to get this podcast online a couple of different times, and poor guy's got no voice. So I probably should have just done this myself earlier, but we'll get back on track. But we appreciate the folks watching live, and let me know if you have any suggestions too on things you want to see on the podcast. Always looking for suggestions, but we're just trying to keep things interesting here. This is I think this is really, with the draft be going on, one of the better times of the off season. As soon as the draft is over, it's going to start getting dead again. So that's where we're going to have our team reviews and then preseason power rankings and all the fun stuff. So, and of course, the last podcast of the true off season will be August 29th, debate night, Alex versus Vince. Everybody loves that. So we'll be looking forward to that. So, all right, everybody, see you later. Thanks for listening to the ramble, and we'll see you next time.